Welcome back to America's Undercurrents, where we dig into the stories beneath the toxic surface of America. This is episode 3, The Monsanto Seed Mafia. When you hear the name Monsanto, if you've ever heard of it, what comes to mind? For most people, it would be genetically modified crops and or Roundup, the weed killer. And if you've heard of them and maybe looked into it, really angry farmers and lawsuits. But the true story of this entire mafia system is way deeper than all that. This is not just the story of one company, it is the story of a small chemical manufacturer that grew into a corporate giant and then tried to control the entire building blocks of life in America from seed to table, food, farming, the whole nine in that regard. And the way they did it tells us a lot about what modern America lets you get away with, about power, about greed, and how far corporations will go to have the control over that aspect of the world around us. It is pretty much limitless. But this story starts back in 1901 in St. Louis, Missouri. Monsanto was founded by a guy named John Francis Queeny. Queeny was a businessman and he married into money and then named the company after his wife's family. Olga Monsanto was her name. Their first product was not seed nor food. It was an artificial sweetener that he sold in Coca-Cola, or to Coca-Cola, rather. Coca-Cola used it in their product. And that was the start, not farming, but chemistry. Um, Again, I think I said this in both my previous videos. The early 1900s to like the 1950s was an explosion in all sorts of chemicals. They were trying to make a chemical for literally everything to continue to minimize how much manpower was needed for certain things or to make things more efficient. Um, Over the next few decades, Monsanto grew from manufacturing industrial chemicals, and by the 1920s, they were one of America's largest producers of sulfuric acid. And then by 1930s, they were pumping out PCBs, which is polychlorinated biphenyls. I probably pronounced that wrong. I do almost every time, so check that if you want to know the exact pronunciation. But PCBs were another miracle chemical catchphrase of the 1900s, pretty much. They didn't burn, they didn't break down. They were used in electrical equipment, coolants, paints, and plastics. So very versatile for the time. But like everything else, there was a trade off. They were very toxic, and Monsanto knew it from the gate. In the 1930s, there was internal memos within Monsanto that admitted PCBs caused liver damage in the workers and their staff on site. By the 1960s, 30 years later, so plenty of time to stop this, evidence linked them to cancers, developmental problems, and environmental destruction. But they kept producing them until they were finally banned in the 1970s, going to show just like how DuPont is still pushing to make Teflon today. These guys won't really stop until there is something that forces you to. If the money can continue to bypass protocols, they'll let it go. It's another forever chemical. So, World War II and the Cold War gave Monsanto new opportunities within U.S. government contracts. They were deeply involved in the Manhattan Project, which, if you don't know, is the creation of the atomic bombs that we ended up dropping on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Monsanto ran the Mound Laboratory in Ohio, producing the polonium for nuclear weapons. Thinking about that, a company that would be one day the largest seller of seeds started by making chemicals and then helping with the assistance of nuclear bombs. Um, there's a meme, this is not in my script, but there's a meme that is like it shows some random company and they're like, "Oh, finally a company in America. It's not made for war." And it shows them making washing machines, but then the assembly belt underneath is like M16s. Some way, somehow, almost every large American corporation has made something for war. But then came the Vietnam War. Monsanto, seeing opportunity within this, developed Agent Orange. So we got chemicals during the world wars. We got chemicals um, that were used to end the world war. World War II. And now we got more chemicals, Agent Orange. Every history buff that's read anything about Vietnam knows the downstream effects of Agent Orange. It was devastating for our military personnel, the environment, and the locals that dealt with it way worse than anybody else because they had no escape. It was a defoliant spray that they sprayed in the jungles, and the idea was to strip away all the cover that the Viet Cong had because that was their homeland. They knew it way better than we did, and we were trying to get rid of any advantages they may have. Um, it was loaded with dioxins, which in my last video we went over how that is one of the most toxic compounds known to man, one of the most toxic compounds we've ever created. Um, the Vietnamese citizens that were stuck there were experiencing cancer rates through the roof, birth defects, neurological disorders, and other lifelong problems that a lot of our veterans also came home with from a war that they didn't want to be in the first place. Monsanto denied responsibility. They blamed the government, but the truth is they made billions from producing poisons that scarred the world, just like they did before. By the 1970s and 80s, Monsanto began shifting away from industrial chemicals because regulations were finally catching up. Just like I said, they're not going to stop until they're forced to. PCBs were banned and dioxin scandals tainted their image. So they pivoted from chemicals to agriculture, which is exactly what I would like to see too. One of the most destructive manufacturers in the world shifting to our food source. That sounds like an amazing idea. But they didn't abandon their old playbook when they came over to the food industry. Their first major move was herbicides. Monsanto developed glyphosate, which is a hot button word nowadays, in the 1970s, and they branded it Roundup. Roundup was marketed as a farmer's dream. It was a weed killer that could wipe out unwanted plants and was very quick and very effective. It became one of the most widely used herbicides in history. But the hat trick with all this was Roundup was only the beginning. Kind of like sell the disease to then sell the cure. You're making profit off of both sides. In the 1990s, Monsanto developed genetically modified crops that were resistant to Roundup. Soybeans, corn, cotton, and canola were of the first. So now farmers could spray their entire field with Roundup, killing weeds but leaving their crops untouched. So they started a monopoly on the farming industry. Everybody needed to use Roundup to keep up with their neighbor who was using Roundup, but if you sprayed it directly on your crops, it would kill it. Now they have this genetically modified seed that can withstand Roundup. So to keep up with your neighbor, you have to buy in to the Monsanto seed Mafia, just like he did. You have to buy their seeds, you have to buy their pesticides, and you fall into this trap. It was a brilliant trap, but it was a trap. How they ended up genetically modifying this too is kind of terrifying. Outside of the plant that they created Roundup at, they had a dumping grounds, and everything around this dumping ground was yeah. Nothing could really survive this chemical. So they went into it and found out the things that were surviving at a micro level, and there was a certain kind of bacteria that could live through this. So they took the genetics out of this bacteria or the bacteria itself. Can't remember exactly. This isn't in my script. And they put it in a gene gun, and a gene gun shoots gold particles at a very fast rate into the tissues of whatever you're shooting it at. And they started with the soybean plant and extracted this genome from this piece of bacteria, put it in the gene gun, shot into the soybeans, and it effectively changes genetics so it could withstand being sprayed with Roundup. So, Monsanto planted those seeds, and under the U.S. patent law, farmers were not allowed to save them. Every single season, they had to buy new seeds. So, Monsanto could ensure they always had a revolving door of profit. If pollen from Monsanto's GMO crop drifted into a farmer's non GMO field, Monsanto could sue them. They would sue them for patent infringement. And they did. Dozens of lawsuits crushing the small farmers and trying to intimidate people so they could continue to build up their mafia. Through this, farmers went bankrupt. A lot of the small farmers that couldn't afford to buy in They lost their land, they lost their family's farm that could have been in it for generations, and Monsanto raked in billions of dollars while continuing this mafia scandal. Seeds are the foundation for life itself, truthfully, and they had become corporate property. America. For centuries, farming was built on saving seeds, one harvest, and then that gave life to the next, just like nature works. It was tradition, survivalism, and essentially freedom, which was all taken away. Monsanto broke that cycle, they destroyed it and turned it into a dependency. And once farmers were locked into Monsanto's system with the GMO seeds plus the Roundup herbicide, and once farmers were locked into Monsanto's system, GMO seeds sprayed with the Roundup herbicide, it became nearly impossible to escape. Those who resisted often found themselves surrounded by neighbors growing Monsanto crops, and cross pollination was inevitable. And Monsanto's lawyers were just waiting. They would literally go out and patrol the farm fields that had their seeds in them so they could get as close to the neighboring ones as they could to look in and figure out if it was one of their products. Because when you use their seed and you sign the deed to do so, they also effectively had right to any land that their crop was growing on. By the early 2000s, Monsanto controlled more than 90% of the GMO seed market. And this wasn't just about the farmers, it was about all food itself, from seed to your dinner plate or from seed to your livestock feed that would then end up on your dinner plate. Everything technically had Monsanto ingredients, and a single corporation had its hand in the global food chain from soil to your plate, no matter what route it took. Resistance grew, environmental groups sounded the alarm about biodiversity collapse, scientists warned of superweeds evolving resistance to Roundup, and lawsuits mounted over cancers linked to glyphosate that are still going on today. Glyphosate is a horribly toxic chemical. Monsanto's name became associated with toxins along with this and corruption. They were branded as one of the most hated corporations in the world at this time. And in 2018, for reasons people don't really know, Bayer, the German pharmaceutical giant, bought Monsanto for $63 billion. And they hoped the Monsanto name would just fade away. But lawyers didn't stop still pursuing them, even though it was bought by new leadership. Billions of dollars have been paid out to cancer victims linked to Roundup to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and the legacy of that lives on, and it's a very dark one. So this is the story of Monsanto from the early 1900s with their first chemicals to PCBs to Ancient Orange to Roundup, from nuclear bombs to seed patents. It's very, if you want to think of an American corporation, this is it. They had their hand in everything, from nukes to your dinner plate, from forever chemicals to livestock feed. It was in everything. They didn't sell products, they sold control and a curse, which is doubling down on being evil. And even though Monsanto's name is gone, their system still remains. Seeds are still patented, farmers are still trapped, and glyphosate still saturates fields, rivers, and our food. Uh, Monsanto may have been swallowed by Bayer, but its shadow stretches across every plate, every farm, and every bite of food. Because when you own the seed, you own the future. Next time, we are going to go to Flint, Michigan for a crisis that happened during my lifetime and discover why this city was intentionally poisoned, not by accident, and by corruption and false cost cutting. Episode 4, The Flint Water Crisis, is next. Thank you guys. I've really been enjoying this so far.